Now, I wanted to do a deep dive on a plant that is prolific right now on the property, and I put a bit of a mandate on myself to get to know the plants that are doing really well on the property, but not just to get to know them from a human perspective and edible qualities and all that kind of stuff. I wanted to get to know their folklore, their ancestry, and I'm going to be sharing I did 2 weeks of a deep dive on nasturtium, and I thought I'd just share with you guys what I've found. And most of the study has been off the internet. I found it quite hard to find books. So if you do know any books about nasturtium, or even parts of books that talk about potentially the folklore, the mythology, the heritage, the original ecosystem that it lived in, please send them through, because I'm gonna have to revisit this plant again one day. Uh, but yes, at the moment it's very vibrant, very showy. The big flame-born colors that are just expressing themselves throughout winter. And yes, winter, which is another big tick. The fact that it's able to feed the pollinators during this time of the year when most of the flowers are diminished. Although right now the acacias are starting to come in, which that's why I got this guy here. Beautiful displays of yellow along our roadsides at the moment, and the citrus of orange and yellow are still hanging on the trees, and then this beautiful understory of nasturtium is expressing itself through the system. So it's a beautiful plant. If you want information about its edible properties, I mean, there's plenty out there. I kind of thought I would steer away from that common knowledge and try and find something a little bit deeper. But yes, edible flower, edible leaf, edible seed, that peppery taste, which kind of links to why it got its name, its common name, nasturtium, because the name nasturtium is the botanical name for watercress, and it shares that similarity in that peppery, spicy fragrance. Yeah, similar to watercress. If you want to know its botanical name, that is Tropaeolum, and you will remember that because Tropaeolum means little trophy, and we'll get to that because there's significance to that as we lead into the European adoption of this plant that was from the Andes. But there are about 80, 90 different types of this nasturtium, and we'll get into one of them that I think is very interesting, and a couple of other ones that have won awards for being so unique. But we'll kind of have a look at where it came from, which I think is always really important when looking at plants, especially when you're growing in food forest systems. Because to know the origin of the plant is to know how it grows in its natural environment. And after deep diving this plant, it has such a diverse range of potential climates. And I think that's probably why it has become such a successful plant in people's gardens and in around the world, because nasturtium is actually from the Andes, or that's where we've found records of it in the Andes, growing on these, terraced slopes, rocky outcrops. It has a really diverse range of climates, and I believe that's probably links to the success of the plant as it's being cultivated across the globe as we speak. But the bit that I wanted to kind of deep dive into, which I found quite hard to deep dive into, is there wasn't much information about tribes in the Andes with nasturtium, although there was one. Is to do with a type of nasturtium species which actually has tubers. I think it was Mashua, which is nasturtium but has tubers. Now you probably have nasturtium in your backyard, but it may not have tubers on it. These ones have tubers like potato. Now this was a common edible crop, and there is a little thing here. that was reported by a Spanish chronicler, Cobo. He reported that the Inca generals would feed mashua to their soldiers to suppress libido, ensuring loyalty and focus during military campaign. And then there's a scientific study below that says male rats fed mashua, studies showed 45% drop in testosterone. And then there's another quote that I found, which I think was on Wikipedia, but there's a line that says, "They will forget their wives." So there is a theory with a little bit of evidence behind it that these tubers were fed to soldiers during campaigns to lower their testosterone so they can focus on the battle at hand. Yeah, I'm kind of speechless when it comes to that. That's fascinating. And how do you know that bit of information? Is just, it's beautiful. It's really, I'd love to find more information on that or deep dive that, because it's interesting. But that kind of leads us into Europe, because nasturtium was found and brought over to Europe in the 16th century. And from there it exploded. It was in the gardens of, in the king's gardens and courtyards. And it was this very bright, vibrant plant, which I think is interesting because this is kind of where we get to this meaning of this plant changed, or it kind of it kind of cultivated itself a completely different personality through the eyes of the Europeans. And I think this has got to do with it because Tropaeolum means little trophy, like I said before, and it was coined by the botanist Carl Linnaeus, who saw it as a representation of a very common practice when the Roman, even Greek, armies would be victorious. They would erect a trophy pole of the vanquished foes' shields and armor. And he thought the plant looked very similar to the leaf looked similar to the shield, and the helmet looked similar to blood-stained helmet. So he called it Tropaeolum, little trophy. And that kind of leads into the symbolism of this plant in Europe seemed to be a lot about patriotism, bravery, and conquest. Really interesting. I'm sure it had deep spiritual connection with the people of the Andes, and then we move into Europe, and it had a completely different take potentially. It meant heroism and patriotism. It's that bright, that vibrant color, that's striking. And there's some beautiful art that I found of those times. But in terms of common species that we have, you can pick these guys up from anywhere these days. But there are some award-winning cultivars. This is interesting. The Alaska series. The Alaska series is leaves that have white, like dabbled snow over. And if you want to Google it, well worth Googling. Just Google Alaska series nasturtium because it's brilliant. There is the whirlybird series, which I think the whirlybird series is probably one that is sold in the shops, because the species I have now is mixed color, and that's what the whirlybird is. And the Hermine grasshopper, which is an interesting one. It's like a multi-flowered version. Nasturtium has 5 flowers, but this variety, I think, I couldn't count it. It's kind of looks a little bit like a hibiscus variety, like a cross between a hibiscus, that kind of dense floral display. Um, so well worth checking those ones out. And there's actually a blue variety, which is the Tropaeolum azureum. And it's from Chile, and it's a violet blue with white eyes. That's a stunning one. And I think blue flowers are definitely a keeper in people's gardens. I think blue is such an amazing color to have dappled through a garden or a food forest. On my property and in a food forest, when I do a big prune and open up the canopy, it really expresses. And I find winter, when I make that big prune, that big chop and drop, this plant just explodes. And I haven't noticed it smothering, which I was worried could happen, but it tends to just kind of float. It's such an amazing plant, and if it does smother something, it's very easy to manage. But once you have this plant in your garden, it's in there. It produces so much, and that kind of leads into food. I've had nasturtium guacamole, and I've just made some capers, which is just using the seeds as with some vinegar and some salt, and then mixing it, popping it into a glass jar with some bay leaves, some pepper, and a bunch of different bits and pieces like that. But they make poor man's capers. It's pretty good, and I mean it's such a giving plant. Why not? And then obviously the leaves and the flowers. The flowers, if you want to impress someone, you can put it on a dish. And they're, edible, a little bit peppery. They're fantastic. Health, high levels of vitamin C, which I thought was interesting, and lutein, which is kind of repairing your eyes, I think it was, which isn't interesting. And there's plenty of ways you can eat this plant, and I'm sure there's more than what I'm going to mention here, but I'm just going to mention what I've had before and what I've done before. Capers, poor man's capers, which is using the seeds. The poor man's capers is a fantastic one because it's super easy to do. Bit of vinegar, bit of salt in a jar with your seeds, bay leaf, garlic, pepper, put it in the fridge, let it sit. Gorgeous, easy to have, very easy. I've had nasturtium guacamole before. Very nice, very nice. But that's essentially it about nasturtium and all I've managed to gather up in terms of information. If you have more, please share. I'm going to be doing a bit of a scrapbook about this. The goal was to share a long form video, short form video, and something for my newsletter. So the scrapbooking that I've been doing, I'm going to post that into the newsletter. So make sure you sign up to that if you want to see a bit of a hard PDF version of it. But yes, that is my little deep dive on the beautiful nasturtium. So thank you very much for joining me, and I'll try and make another one soon. Not too sure what plant, but I kind of let the plant show up, and I usually speaks to me before I decide to make a video about it. But yes, have a good one. Cheers.